Is it recording? Great. Okay.
Is it recording? Did it?
I think so. Usually it like yells at me that it's recording, but it's all right. I think it is. So anyway, I think the best way to do it is probably just to go with the most upvoted questions, the most thumbs up ones, but we have plenty of time to get through all these questions here, plus more as they come in. Um, so I think the first question from Emma, I'd like to know more about the behind the scenes of the COVE surveys, wanting to know more information about how the survey questions are changed and how often. I think that's probably a good one for Ryan. Do you want to take that one, Ryan?
I would love to. So Emma, thanks for posting the question. So the behind the scenes of the COVE survey, I'll give the short answer and then I'll add a little bit more for information. The survey questions are almost never changed. We do our best to make sure that we have the optimal survey for our visitors and understanding their experiences. And importantly, that the question language and response options stay consistent over time so that we can have longitudinal comparisons. So you can compare your data from last year to this year, or 5 years ago to this year, right? Pre-pandemic to post-pandemic visitors and their experiences. We have a questions and measures team of experts. So COVES museum professionals who have deep expertise in designing and creating surveys or psychographic measurement, things like that. We meet at least once a year to review the core COVES survey for everyone's behalf and ensure that it is still meeting our standards and delivering the data that we deem most essential for all of us to understand those experiences. Occasionally, we make changes either because best practices are coming about or we're reflecting on the existing survey itself and realizing we need to make changes. And that has been done a number of times before. One notable example coming up, we are going to be making a change to the race and ethnicity response options, and at a minimum, including one additional response option for Middle Eastern North African. This is also being talked about on the US Census. We are going to do it in advance of any changes to the US Census. But one reason that's important is because for at least a temporary period, there will be this transition where the data don't look exactly like they used to, and the data won't be exactly matched up to US Census data. But we feel like that's a very important change for everyone's behalf so that visitors know we are being thoughtful about this and being proactive in our measurement. The short addition I'd like to add about behind the scenes is the core survey was created initially by doing a crosswalk of institutional visitor experience surveys from as many museums as we could get our hands on, aligning the questions, and again, having a team of museum professionals kind of decide which ones are we seeing most consistently, which ones are most useful for decision making around who is visiting and how those experiences are. So we had a lot of information coming in to inform our survey design, and we continue to try and make sure it is accurate in reflecting two things: that visitors can see themselves represented, and we are doing our best being socially justice oriented, if you will.
Can I add a little bit, Ryan?
Of course.
I think it's probably worth mentioning that the kind of crosswalk initial instrument creation was back in, oh boy, I don't know, 2015 or something like that, 2014, which was at the time COVES was science centers only. So when we got the follow-up grant from IMLS to sort of expand into art museums, there was a period where our kind of partner art sites did like a review of the existing instrument and kind of like with the eye, like it already exists and we'd like to align where possible. So I'm sure it would look a little bit different if they were building it completely from scratch, but said like, okay, here's some places where it does need to be different, most notably the motivations. And so that's one area where if you look at like the science aggregate and look at that question and the art aggregate, those motivations will be different because our art sites were like, we really need, some different categories in here. We don't need these, we do need these. But there was like an additional kind of review from the art end that happened in 2020 or so when we had that grant. So yeah, and I guess if there's like follow-up questions to our answers, you could use raise hand or the chat or something like that too. But for now, I will.
I have
Oh
a
yeah,
secondary follow-up to that as well. We're all going to jump in on this
I know,
one.
right?
The site-specific questions, there isn't a rule for how often they can be changed. We have a recommendation of, I don't know, at least have it on there for a quarter. You want enough data that you can say something about it. But those are more variable and not subject to the same questions and measures team because they don't affect everyone. They just affect you. So when you send them to us, we might have recommendations based on what we've seen work better with other sites, or just our experience with surveys. So that's a little more malleable and a good thing to reach out if there's something else you want to ask about, or taking something off because you're not using it anymore. So we don't need to ask visitors anymore. So that piece is a little more fluid.
Thanks, Allison and Ryan and myself. I think I'm going to take the next question. Can comments be removed from the dashboard in case of profanity or personal remarks? So I will say I'm the one who's probably spent the most time in the dashboard, like figuring out what it can and can't do. And this is infrequent that you'll see something like this, but I have occasionally seen like a name get mentioned. So that's a great question. So what I will say is I've never actually removed any comments from the dashboard, but I'm sure it can be done. Whether it's by a manual exclusion from the dashboard only, but you can always find it in your raw data, but just in like a less public place, because I know some people share the dashboard with multiple people throughout their institution and don't want someone's name or some weird comment kind of showing up in there. Um, I'm just going to say, even though I haven't done it before, yes, absolutely. That seems like a very important thing to do, even if it's like a one by one like manual thing. So if you do see something like that, please let us know. Email coves@mos.org and we can look into it right away. If this question is even about a specific thing, private chat in the Zoom right now or send an email right now, and like later on today I can take a look at it and see about how to exclude it. And I can also try to flag stuff as it comes in if I notice it. But typically every site is like in their dashboard more often than any one of us, because we have many of them to kind of look at and go through, and we can miss stuff like that. So if you see something, absolutely let us know and we'll take care of it as soon as we can. Great question though, very important. See, the next question is it possible to add an additional language to the survey, specifically Navajo? And I'm going to have Allison address that one.
The short answer is not quickly, but definitely something that we can discuss as part of that, because there are considerations beyond just a literal translation to make sure that it makes sense. And then we would need someone that we could consult with to make sure that the translation is appropriate and not just if you've ever put anything into Google Translate, and we all know that sometimes it makes sense on the other end and sometimes it doesn't. So we don't specifically have plans, but if you have a specific request, because of the intensity of our survey, trying to translate it is not a small feat to maintain. I don't know if Ryan, if you want to add to that with other considerations.
Yeah, we so everyone knows we use Ericsson translation to ensure that our Spanish translation, our Spanish version of the survey is up to date as often as possible, which means if you have site-specific questions, we have translated those for you if they were added a while ago. If they've been added most recently, they will be included on our next iteration of updates with Ericsson. So it's a very formal process. They do the forward and then reverse translation, to Allison's point. There are cultural considerations beyond just language translation that need to be considered for visitors who are from different places, and we try and be sensitive about that, which is why we have not done more widespread translation. So while Navajo is a great idea, what we will probably do to prioritize language translation across all 100 plus museum members is think about the languages that are most commonly requested, to consider them. But if you have a specific need, we can definitely include that and try and prioritize it and see who else is interested. This is definitely the first time I've heard Navajo be requested, as an example.
Great. All right. Thank you, Ryan and Allison. I'm going to throw myself in for the next one as well. Why are there numbers showing up instead of exhibit names on my dashboard? Because it's one of the things that annoys me the most about the dashboard, even though I love it so much and it's a really powerful and awesome tool. Basically, the reason for this, one of the most frequent emails we get about the dashboard, I would say, is because Qualtrics doesn't expect that we will have a survey that is running and live that we will be changing the response options for. They're like, well, you should never do that with a survey. All the response options should be you write the survey and that's what it is, and those are your response options. But that's not how the COVES survey works. And so it's not always set up to handle that. So what happens is that we add a new temporary exhibit to your like, what did we see or do question for your museum, and then Qualtrics doesn't understand that there's a new response option, or it does understand it, but it doesn't understand how to communicate with the dashboard about it. So it throws up this weird number. So in the absence of any other information, you can probably guess that it's your newest temporary exhibit or newest addition to that list. But of course, it's weird to have a number there and you can't be sure, especially if you had more than one thing get added. You're like, which one is which? So the answer to what to do about it is, again, boring dashboard answer. Just email us. It unfortunately is a manual fix, but it takes like 2 minutes. So it's really easy to do. And Allison happily thinks that she's found a way to get rid of that problem, but not until we do another like gigantic full refresh of the survey, which we did last July and was a huge project. So we want to avoid it until we have to do it. But when we do it in another, I don't know, year or two, we might be able to get rid of that issue. But for now, we're trying to stay on top of it if we know that you have a new exhibit that's getting added. But unfortunately, we can't change the number until data actually show up in there. So just between like not knowing when you're collecting data, or like sometimes data collection is a little bit inconsistent, like which is really hard to predict when the surveys are going to show up or when a visitor is going to select that option on the survey. You might be collecting data like a champion, but nobody's going to that one thing that you just added, or they just haven't happened to go there yet. So it's a little bit of a random, thing as to when it actually shows up. So if you notice it first, send us an email. If we notice it first, we'll change it as soon as we can. But unfortunately, it's just one of those dang things that, again, despite my really loving the dashboard and everything it can do, it's the one thing about it that just makes my head hurt. So bear with us, and we'll keep trying to get rid of those dang numbers. Let me see. The next question, I believe, is Martha saying we're now in our 4th month of COVES. When and how do we get access to our dashboard? Which is a great question. And I believe Martha's at an Art Bridges partner site, perhaps. So I don't know, Allison. Oh, hi, Martha. Hello. Yeah. What can you remind me what museum you're from?
Sorry, I was eating my lunch, which
No.
is why I had the camera off. If I had anything in my teeth, I apologize. So I am the Director of Education at the Parish Art Museum and Director of Education and Visitor Experience. And so we've just finished, we're into our 4th month now.
Mhm.
And we're very excited to begin comparing our data to others.
Yeah. Allison, do you want to take it?
I have good news for you.
Oh, good.
I preemptively started building yours.
Oh, good.
Close
Okay.
to where you needed to be for us to build it. But I had not sent it yet. Please reach
Okay.
out to the Art Bridges team so we have what the login will be. But generally, especially with smaller sites, it's 3 months of data or having at least 100 surveys, just because some of the questions become very volatile under that amount. And so we wanted to make sure that the data you have is usable data and useful usable data. But yes, reach out so we know what the user email is going to be. And I will get that up and going. I think
What do you mean? What do you mean to reach out about user? What I should reach out to tell you? This is my fear, is that I've missed something. That's why I'm not pushing you guys. I just
no worries. Aditi and Kate will reach out to you.
Okay, and Aditi, okay, great. I emailed her this morning, so
yeah.
okay.
So we will get on that and have that to you.
Great.
And then in general, it's 3 months or about 100 surveys or about a quarter of your annual target.
Okay, so it's coming and I'll just hang on. Perfect. I just want to make sure.
We should have that for you
Thank you
before the end of the week.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, get excited. Anyone who's not quite there yet, collect data hard in your first 3 months, and the dashboard, will be ready with it right around then.
And some of the reason, other than wanting to have enough data, the reason that we have that lag time is similar to why do numbers show up. If the data the question hasn't been asked or enough of the responses haven't been picked yet, the dashboard gets weird, and it's hard for us to make sure things are working properly. So we want to have a dashboard that works rather than a buggy dashboard. And so the more data that's in there, the more confident we are that it will not be a buggy dashboard.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I got it. Agree.
Cool. Okay, I think maybe the next one could be for Ryan. What is a common refusal rate?
That is a great question. My brain breaks when I think about refusal rates. I usually think about response rates, which is the proportion of people who say yes or accept to be surveyed. And we commonly find that our response rate is in the 40%. Anywhere from 40 to 50% is common across sites. Now, if yours is not there for any reason, don't be dismayed. We have seen ranges for full year sample COVES members go from like the low to mid 20s all the way up to the 90s. So it is hugely variable by site. The pattern is that large, urban, busy museums tend to be on the lower end. There's something about this like frenetic, busy pace at some of those museums that makes a lot of visitors just pass them by. And those museums are still able to be successful because there's such a high visitor traffic rate. Whereas at smaller museums, more family-oriented museums, perhaps in more rural areas, the response rate is both higher and it's importantly higher because there's less visitor traffic. So in order to get adequate sample sizes, those museums need to capitalize on more of their visitors when they do data collection. A striking telling point for me is at the Museum of Science, when we did our old method of collecting visitor experience surveys and we used an email method, our response rate was close to 20% all the time. And right now, ours is about 45% on average, right? And we are one of those larger museums. So again, across sites, the general pattern is like 40-ish%.
Which seems really low, but it's very typical. So if you're not getting 100% response rate, like that doesn't really happen except in very, very limited circumstances. So you're not doing anything wrong. It's just very typical. Cool. Okay, so I think, let's see, nothing in the chat. Next question is how to deal with customers who get upset, for example, about the gender identity question. And I'm happy to take this one. Gender identity, and sometimes the question about do you identify as LGBTQ plus or LGBT plus are sometimes the ones we hear about the most from sites where visitors or respondents are getting upset or saying something to a data collector about it. And one thing I find interesting is actually the one thing that you could say, of course, to folks is that if they don't want to answer that question, if they don't want to provide that information, that the prefer not to say option is always there. They can basically just decline to answer it. But those questions, the gender identity, and the LGBTQ question, don't have the highest percentage of visitors saying prefer not to say. It's actually income that has the highest percentage. But we never really hear people make comments out loud about the income question, which I find very interesting. But more generally, how I might recommend dealing with that, first is just to lean on any kind of like customer service type training that you might have or know about, or seek that out from like your frontline staff or anything like that, if that's not who's doing the data collection, because that's honestly sometimes what it ends up being a little bit more, is just sort of listening to the visitor and validating their feeling and just kind of making sure that they feel like they were heard. But the COVES survey, we recently added a little disclaimer at the top of the demographic page that says something about like, the survey collects demographic information to better understand our visitors and their experience. And what that means for us is that we collect all that demographic information so that we can disaggregate the data for one main reason, also for comparisons to census, like Ryan was talking about. But disaggregating would be like breaking apart the giant sample of the data into smaller groups. Like we want to look at, non-white visitors and what their experiences look like, or, women and girls who are visiting, like what do their experiences look like? And that could be a really good practice for making sure that everyone is having like an equitable experience at your museum. And you wouldn't be able to do that unless you collected some of that demographic data. Of course, if someone's upset about it, like they're not necessarily going to be like listening to you about that, but just to say that we collect to understand more about our visitors and their experiences here, but just to say that you can always select prefer not to say, or even just say like, I'm sorry that this was so upsetting for you. Sometimes you could even say that this is a survey that is shared across 100 different museums around the country, and that like something like it was not really, it's way above you as a data collector's decision making about what questions get put on there, but just to say like this is shared across many different institutions, and everyone decided what was going to be important on here, and sort of throwing Coves under the bus a little bit if you have to. That's completely fine. There's questions on there that core questions that individual institutions might not choose to put on their own survey, but we all sort of use them because they're core. And there's greater value in sharing and comparing the data than having our own individual, perfectly tailored to our own needs surveys, kind of what we all decided by being part of this project. So it's absolutely fine to sort of put it on the collaborative instead of trying to take full responsibility for it yourself, because you didn't choose the core survey. We did. So there's lots of things you can do about that, but just to the most important thing is probably just to sort of validate the person's sort of feeling, because you're probably not going to like change their mind in the moment, or it's not really a moment for that. It's just for kind of listening and making sure that they walk away with a decent experience at your museum. So
And
but it does happen.
And we also have the COVES instrument explained that has the question language and the answer options and a brief description of why. Some data collectors feel a lot more confident if they understand why the question is being asked, so they can try to address it. If that feels appropriate to tackle, I'm personally am generally of the be empathetic. I blame COVES, even though I am part of the COVES core team. I will still blame the big coves, and it is just being empathetic in the moment. But if you're curious, we do have that, and I dropped the link to where that is on our website in the chat.
Yeah. Allison, I think I might punt the next one to you. How do we engage families with children 5 and under? And I'm guessing that means like in a data collection, like how do you sample those families and handle them?
There are a couple ways. I have found, at least in the Museum of Science setting, it isn't a huge barrier. Talk to the parents, get your ask out quickly and briefly so they know what you're asking. And then you get to have fun conversations with small children about dinosaurs and space and animals. So we recommend, we're not going to coerce a parent into staying. If, as data collectors do this a lot, they'll start to recognize when it's, I'm using my child as an excuse because I would like to leave and say no, and this is how I socially know how to get out of this situation, versus a parent being willing and their kid's just a little squirrely or wants to run around. So a few things: make sure that you're setting up in a space that is safe to pull off to the side, so parents aren't worried that their kids are going to run off and you'll lose them before you have a chance to notice. You can, I've seen some museums, I believe the Bell Museum has a little cart of fidget toys. So you could have something out there for people to play with while they are talking, or while the adult is taking the survey. You can have conversations with the kids. We have just little I helped thank you stickers that are great conversation starters and short distractions. They're just a little dinosaur with our museum logo and I helped. So little things that are small distractions. Talking to kids, as Kate says, talk to little kids is her favorite part. I love that part too. It's really fun asking them about their day, and it makes those few minutes go really, really quickly. And then also just understanding that sometimes kids will be fussy and they want to go, and that is part of the response, right? Is sometimes people will say no, and that's okay.
Cool. I'm upvoting a couple that I know are coming from the call right now. So Summer at the Bell Museum asks, do you have any advice for collecting COVES data at free events where some parts / activities in the museum are closed, or is the advice don't do that? And I'm happy to answer that. I think it's not necessarily don't do that, but my standard question when thinking about collecting COVES data at like an event is the museum visit still basically a museum visit, or like is so much of the museum closed? It's a little bit of a judgment call, right? But like, is it so much not like a normal visit that you wouldn't recognize it as the same thing as when you just bought a ticket and were going in? There's some programs where it's like it's space day at the museum, and you could go and not even know it was space day when you got there, but still participate in all the space activities, which is completely fine for collecting COVES data. That's just like a regular visit with some extra cool stuff, versus like a ticketed event for a corporate party that's only in the lobby. That's not really somewhere where you collect COVES data because they're not really visiting the museum. So if you feel like so much of the museum is closed that it's just too different from a museum visit in your own estimation, then I would say don't do that. But if it's like one or two galleries, or like people have access to a whole wing or something like that, it's if you have more detailed questions about where the line is, we can always talk about it, but there's no strict line. It's like if it feels like it's really not a museum visit anymore, I would not do it. And if it feels like it's a museum visit with some extra stuff or some slightly different stuff, it's fine. In terms of advice, I don't know how different it would be from normal COVES data collection. I will say that there's been some sites that oversample at their like themed weekends because they wanted to compare a bunch of data. Like they wanted to have a comparison, and they needed to collect a lot of data in one weekend in order to do it. But beyond that, I'm not sure about any special considerations. I don't know, Allison or Ryan, if you have anything else to add there.
I've noticed with free events, museums tend to be busier, so you might need to adjust your strategy of where you stand. Maybe it's every two groups instead of every other group, something like that, or have two data collectors so you have someone that can answer questions like, how do I handle parking? Where do I put my coats? Do you have lockers? Where are the bathrooms? Going out in pairs tends to work better at busy times, at least for the Museum of Science, just because you end up answering so many customer service questions that having two people means that one person is still at least consistently collecting data while the other person is handling the myriad of extra questions. But other than that, adjusting where you're standing or where you're setting up, traffic tends to flow a little bit different because free days are busy days. I think those are the main considerations that I would have.
That's a good point. Right. I see another one from, oh yeah, cool, thanks, Summer. Another one that came in during our call was our exhibition ticket sales show that most visitors are members, but COVES data indicate more non-members attended. What should I do to reconcile these? Ryan, you want to give that a shot?
Yeah, and I will acknowledge that that is a tricky question. Most of our comparisons to like known data actually show that the COVES sampling method, the random sampling at exit, does match proportionally to information we have universally on file for our visitors, including membership stuff. So that's unusual. There's a couple things though to keep in mind. One, depending on the size of your organization, members may actually have already been sampled. So you might be getting more declines for that random sampling method from members because they've already done it. This is another type of question that comes up in events like these. Like, if someone tells me they've already done the COVES survey and I've randomly sampled them, can they do it again? And the answer is yes, because assuming it's not the same day, right? It's a different museum visit experience. That's part of a random sample. And even though their personal information won't have changed, their experience might be fundamentally different. So it's possible that that is an explanation for why those numbers are different. One thing you can do to reconcile this, well, there's no easy answer. There's no one simple fix. One thing is to continually monitor your data collection practices and just try and make sure you're doing the random sampling as true to form as possible. Go back to your training, and assuming you're flawless in that, one other suggestion is that we can statistically modify your results. So we can literally weight data It is not straightforward, and it's not something that's like a click of the button on the dashboard. But for more sophisticated analyses, statistical weighting is something that I do for our aggregate analyses, where we're putting extra weight or statistical emphasis on the proportion of visitors that you know should be represented in a certain way, in this case, members. Now, statistical weighting has advantages and disadvantages. The disadvantage being it's complicated, not very straightforward, and no one else will care that you're doing it. And the advantage is that it may change the data. But the question comes back to, are you seeing significant differences between these two groups that tell you you need to be weighting it? For members and non-members, the answer is almost always yes. They tend to have different visit experiences. They often have different characteristics from their group and their personal identity. So it's definitely something to pay attention to. So that would be one where you probably want to reach out to us so we can find a sophisticated solution if one is necessary for you. But the general response for everybody is go back to your data collection practice and your sampling methods and just make sure you're being as random as possible.
And I guess the one thing to add that you probably already thought of, I'm assuming, or this is already taken care of, but just make sure that there's no like technical reason why that's the case. Like, do members buy their and non-members buy their tickets through different avenues and only one is being reflected in your system or something like that? Just making sure that like all of the background technical details are making sense when you're looking at what that breakdown is, just to make sure, you know, everything is right. Although, again, assuming that you've already done that and that it already, you know, you've already noticed that there's a discrepancy there. But that can happen sometimes too, with just the way that members get access to stuff. Sometimes it's not reflected in the same way in all of our systems. So great question though. Really can be definitely a tricky situation. So if you ever want to, whoever this anonymous is, if it's something you want to talk through in more detail, we're absolutely there for that. Great. Okay. How do I avoid biasing the data? I don't know. Allison, yeah?
Take that one. Systematic random sampling, doing what as much as you can to stick to that method to minimize. We are never going to completely reduce bias. We can minimize bias. So things like when you're doing that random sampling, don't even look at people's faces. Look at the invisible line on the floor for the feet crossing it and use that as your mark. Trying to do that really systematically and practice that helps minimize that bias. Addressing, to think of the way to say this, how consistently that method is being used and making sure that everyone is using that method together. There will be some bias in people still will just say no to us and we don't get absolutely everyone, but sticking to that systematic random sampling is the best way to minimize bias.
And another way, I think I was looking at some COVES thing recently and was reminded that another way of thinking about systematic random sampling is thinking that no visitor should have a greater chance of being sampled than another visitor. Like so it could like what Allison said, in the actual moment when you're doing the sampling, that's something you want to consider. But that's also why we think about like collecting data on weekdays and weekends, and like different days of the week. And you know, you have to do it when people are exiting, so you're not going to go out there at 9 a.m. But like trying to maybe get a range of times in the afternoon, or if you know that there's like people who come in the morning, a shift of people who then leave around 11:30 or noon, maybe trying to do, you know, a couple of shifts around then, just to kind of make sure you're capturing the wide range of visitation patterns for the museum is another way to kind of control that bias a little bit.
And to that point, if you have multiple exits, splitting your time between both exits is another way to think about that.
Okay, we've got one more in here, and I think we said we're going to end at 1:40, or you know, at 45 after, not 1:45 necessarily for all of you. So if you do have any more, throw them in here now. But the last question we have in the Slido is the sample of surveys I collect really enough for understanding my visitors? Which you hear sometimes, because maybe, you know, at the Museum of Science, we get over 1 million visitors per year historically, and we collect 1,400 surveys per year. Is that really enough. And Ryan has answered this in great detail in several emails before, so I'll give it to you for the less detailed version here for this call now.
Yeah, and I'll be very transparent. I put that in there anonymously halfway through the call, because yesterday I was reading the New York Times, and they talked a little bit about the way that they do their New York Times Siena polling. So they use it for politics and stuff. And I was fascinated to learn that they still rely on phone polls. They're calling people. Yeah, shocking. And they talked about the testing that they've done to compare things that have tested online methods, cold call methods, in-person methods, all this kind of stuff. But the driving message was the same as the one that COVES has, which is, and to be clear, for many of their polls in which they're reporting on which candidate has what kind of lead or what the general American temperature is on person X or Y, they only collect about 1,000 responses. And so they go into detail about how you don't increase your reliability dramatically by doubling or tripling your sample size, right? It only goes up a little bit. So this follows nicely on the heels of the last question about there's error, right? We do systematic random sampling to minimize error, to reduce bias. It is impossible for all of us, any of us, to collect survey or demographics or anything from every single visitor who comes through the door. So we rely on sampling. And the short answer here is you only need a minimal sample to get enough information about all visitors, understanding that there will be a small amount of error no matter what you do, no matter how many surveys you collect. So our buckets, which go from 500 on the low end to about 1,500 on the high end, are designed to give you adequate statistical precision after a year of collecting data. Meaning that if you think about all the visitors who come through your door and that sample that you've collected over the year, you have enough information there for like a 95% confidence interval and a margin of error of around 4% to generalize to your entire audience. Will it be perfect? No, there's error involved. But the other half of this equation is feasibility. So if your survey sample is 500 and you'd really like for it to be 1,000, but doubling the staff hours or any kind of commitment you have to do that would literally break the system. It's not worth it. So we designed the buckets in mind with institutional feasibility in mind and statistical precision in mind. And I'm happy that I was able to answer it in about 2 minutes, but admittedly, I could spend 30 minutes talking about all the details of this and sample size calculators and what a margin of error is and all those things. And so perhaps I will work on that, but hopefully that explains why our samples are set or our targets are set where they are. And I'll just add or conclude by saying that's why we have set targets for each of you monthly. It is totally okay to miss your target every single month. Go a little bit under, go a little bit over, but over the course of the year, those targets are designed to ensure you have enough information to trust your data. If you're routinely failing to hit those targets, there's more error introduced into any of the estimates that you're using to inform your conversations. So not to end like on a sour note, but that was more of like the call to arms of like, we can all do it. And we've tried to take into account feasibility and hopefully they're all reasonable, but there's a method to the madness.
Right. I think Ryan's key point is that there's a balance between feasibility and like the best data you could possibly get. So we try to balance those two as much as possible, but we're never quite going to reach, perfection for either one, but that's the nature of balancing. So that wraps us up. We got through all the questions in the Slido. Trust me, we have more questions in a Google Doc that we thought about answering. There's no shortage of questions. If there was anything that you wanted to ask but didn't really feel quite comfortable asking in this call, please do email us, coves@mos.org, and we'd be happy to send you an email back or talk with you on a Zoom call if that's more appropriate. Truly, anytime we're all available. Thank you so much for joining us today. And it was great to just answer a bunch of questions with you all.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for leading us, Alex.
Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Bye.